Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this Engaging the Mind program. My name is Susan Lynch. I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. I'm so pleased that you are joining us this afternoon. I want to thank UVA School of Architecture for their partnership on today's program. Before we start, I want to bring a few things to your attention. We received many questions in advance of the program. If you have a question during the presentation, you may enter it in the webinar Q&A at the bottom of the screen. You'll find resources in the webinar chat box below. Please also note this program is being recorded and will be posted in Lifetime Learning's podcast library in about a week or two. We are fortunate today to have Dean Hutson, the Dean of UVA School of Architecture, joining us for the start of the program to provide a welcome and to introduce our speakers. I will introduce him quickly. Malo Hutson is the Dean and Edward E. Elson Professor at the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia. He's a nationally and internationally recognized expert in the areas of community development, climate resilience, environmental justice, and urban health. As a scholar, teacher, and practitioner, he focuses on the nexus of environmental, architectural, and urban equity practices. So thank you again for joining us. And Dean Hutson, I invite you to start the program.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us, the School of Architecture and UVA Lifetime Learning. I will tell you, they just put on fantastic events. So I'm so grateful and feel lucky and fortunate to be at UVA where we have these types of great programming that are put on often. So I'm so glad you can join us. As Susan said, I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture. And one of the things we have in the School of Architecture, we have architecture, we have the Department of Landscape Architecture, we have the Department of Architectural History, which is the oldest in the country, and we also have the Department of Urban Environmental Planning. And so with those four departments, we're really able to think about our place and space, thinking about our environments, thinking about design and biomaterials, all those wonderful things that really shape our environment and our built environment and protect our natural environment. But one of the things we take seriously is being a public institution and really understanding that the role of a public institution is to have a broader impact and a positive impact in society. And so that's a big part of all the work that we do here. And we try to think about not just the urban and the rural, but that it's a continuum. We are located in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so we're right at that nexus of the North and South. And so there's a lot of reach that we have, and certainly being at a great institution like UVA, we feel like there are lots of opportunities to have these kind of conversations, but more importantly, move beyond the conversation and really engage in our day-to-day work. And so I'm just so pleased to be able to introduce two of my wonderful colleagues today that have been doing this work. And so not only thinking about the role of a public institution, but really in their day-to-day research, their teaching, their practice, they're committed to this work. So I'm so delighted to be able to introduce them. My first colleague that I want to introduce is C.L. Bohannon. Dr. Bohannon is the Associate Dean of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and he's also Associate Professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture. So I just want to welcome Dr. Bohannon. The next colleague I want to introduce is Professor Elgin Cleckley. Professor Cleckley is an Assistant Professor of Architecture. He of not just architecture, but also education and health. So he's in the education school here, Department of Education and Human Development, as well as in the nursing school here. So we're very lucky to have him. He's also our undergraduate director of architecture. So he's doing a lot with our students. And he's the director of our design thinking program. So oftentimes I'll see Professor Cleckley and say, when do you sleep? Because you're doing so many things. And I'm really happy to mention that he's the past director, of the design director of justice at UVA's Equity Center. And he is one of our alums. So he graduated here with his architecture degree as an undergraduate. So I just want to welcome both of my colleagues. I hope it's a wonderful program this afternoon, which I have no doubt it will be, and I look forward to listening. So I turn it over to you all now.
Thank you, Dean Hutson, for the introduction, and also to UVA's Lifetime Learning for this opportunity to share our collaboration and also to present with Dr. Bohannon. I'm excited to share our work with Hood Huggers International. They're based out of Asheville, North Carolina. They've created Blue Note Junction, which is a model of designing for change. Blue Note Junction will be a cultural center, a wellness facility, an event venue, retail, and entrepreneurship hub committed to reinvesting profits back into BIPOC neighborhoods and endeavors throughout the Asheville region. We've been collaborating with its creators and our community partners, Dwayne Barton and Sophie Martin. They're the founders of Hood Huggers International, and they're also supported by Abby Felder of Asheville Creative Arts. Yes, this project has Black origins, but it's inclusive and beloved by the community we've worked with and supported. I want to take a moment, express my deep gratitude to our amazing student designers who worked so hard since last August to achieve our goals. So with that, let's go to Asheville. We're heading upward to Asheville's uneven plateau of 2,200 feet into Appalachia. It's a term coined by Frank X. Walker, told to us by one of the leaders of Hood Huggers International, Dwayne Barton. It refers to African Americans living in Appalachia, an ever-evolving cultural landscape poised to render the invisible visible. It contains a population that needs and deserves economic investment to ensure its visibility and thriving future. Hood Huggers International is an organization rebuilding Appalachia through art, environment, and social enterprise. They believe that restoring the planet is a universal sport. This project began with a conversation, as I met with Dwayne Barton several times over a year, after learning about Blue Note Junction from an Asheville tourism magazine. The article shared information about the project, showed in-progress drawings of what Blue Note Junction could be by local youth and an architecture firm, and asked if you had time, talent, or treasure to share and to get in touch. So I did, with conversations leading to a design research studio with 13 UVA students, supported by Empathic Design, the title of my design firm, teaching and collaboration methods and initiatives. In Empathic Design, we reference a definition of empathy from social researcher and empathy expert Carla McLaren. She says that empathy is a social and emotional skill that helps us feel and understand the emotions, circumstances, intentions, thoughts, and needs of others, such that we can offer sensitive, perceptive, and appropriate communication and support. Empathic designers follow this definition of empathy to attain the ability to understand how other people feel in a situation from a point of view rather than our own. On one of my first trips to visit the area, I recall what my father taught me from his career in the Federal Highway Administration. In West Asheville, if you look in that red circle you see there, it's where Hood Huggers and Blue Note Junction are located. Highways 26 and 240 is an urban renewal highway project of the 1960s. It's just nearby. A familiar story of tearing through the very heart of the Burton Street neighborhood, a historically Black community. It was originally called Buffalo Street until it was renamed Burton in 1922 after one of Asheville's founders, John Burton. This is a community of resiliency and pride that survived the odds for over 100 years, from the economic decline to the Great Depression and to other recessions, to having chunks of its neighborhood shifted by rapid gentrification, carved off by road expansions and highway builds, also still continuing today. One thing is certain, however, that this community owes its past, its present, and its future greatness to the visionary mastermind, Edward Walton E.W. Pearson, Sr. E.W. Pearson, who was born in January of 1872 and lived to July of 1946, was a military veteran, having served as a Buffalo soldier during the American Indian War. He was a civil rights leader and community activist, a neighborhood developer, sports league organizer, and the Black mayor of West Asheville, where he moved in 1906. Using real estate experiences while he gained in Chicago, Pearson worked to develop and create African-American neighborhoods, including the Burton Street neighborhood. He established businesses and resources that included a general store that also doubled as his headquarters. And you can see it in the bottom left corner. It was called the Mountain City Mutual Insurance Company. He also created Asheville's first Black semi-pro baseball team in 1916, the Asheville Royal Giants. In 1933, he'd form and lead Asheville's first branch of the NAACP. In 1913, Pearson developed the Buncombe County and District Colored Agricultural Fair, which was held annually in Burton Street from 1916 to 1947. "Let's make a garden," said Safi Martin. Dwayne Barton and Safi Martin, our clients, toured us around where Hood Huggers International is located, in the Peace Garden that you see here. And this was this past October. Dwayne returned to his hometown of Asheville in 2001, where his family lived for 4 generations. Founded in 2003 by the couple as a response to the war on drugs and the war in Iraq, the Peace Gardens and Market house a stage for performances, a wood fire pizza oven, art and sculptures, a greenhouse, a farm stand, and a flower and vegetable garden. After our studio visit in October, we spoke about how pictures hardly do it justice. Safi made us the best pizza, we met Dwayne's mother, Gwendolyn, and local youth shared with us program possibilities. Just down from the Peace Garden on Burton Street, on 2 plots of land, we arrive at the future location of Blue Note Junction, which you can see on the left side of this slide. The idea of Blue Note Junction is based on years of community, city, and governmental planning, and the team has begun fundraising to support its development. They do this in a context increasingly defined by ongoing gentrification and continued highway expansion of 26 and 240. In green, you can see the houses and structures to be removed through eminent domain in the current expansion. It's the 3rd time in the neighborhood's history that this highway has claimed some of its land, home, and businesses. If you look in section A, there's an area hatched in red, and that's the site for Blue Note Junction. You'll also see a dotted line going around the A, which is where a sound wall will be placed for abatement from the highway. Blue Note Junction worked with a Charlotte-based firm to develop in-kind renderings, which they're currently using to support their fundraising efforts that you can see here. While the scheme provides a take on how to deploy the Blue Note Junction program on the site and engage some of the funding constraints and income generation needs, we applied deep thinking on how an approach to the program could engage Appalachia, the neighborhood history, and ongoing gentrification and highway context. With this great foundation, our design research studio of 13 amazing student designers follow the program you see here, determined by community partners on the right. Additional considerations in the program included a phased approach to match capacity and funding, also starting with an artist village on the site, and initial phases needed to incorporate both income generating uses and temporary activation related to long-term use. And in our work, we created empathic ecosystems. As a design research studio is named after Edward Wayne Barnett, the first Black male graduate of our school, and Audrey Spencer Horsley, the first Black female graduate. Both have backgrounds in creating inclusive spaces throughout the South, the country, and beyond. The studio is co-taught with worldwide community engagement expert Liz Ogbu of Studio O out of Oakland. Funding was raised to support B&J, that's Blue Note Junction's, leadership to attend events at UVA, such as our final review that you can see here. And after their post-studio work, 3 students are continuing to work with Blue Note Junction, local Asheville contractors, the local architecture firm, and the youth groups to construct Blue Note Junction. These positions are now also named after our first Black graduates to honor their legacy. Empathic Design continues to support with funding opportunities and resources. You'll see Maloon Tershak here presenting at our final review, and Dwayne Barton in that cool green hat you see to the front in the photo. In our studio's process, we started with a pre-care package to prepare students with readings and exercises for our time together, an introduction to our community and orientation, a community partner orientation with Dwayne, Safi, and Albie Felder of ACA. Students then worked in design research teams, looking at the social, the cultural, the historical, the environmental, and the natural. This continued with grounding into our work and pre-ideas, and then preparation for our visit. We came back and we cooked our ideas in what we call the kitchen. And then we had our final review with our community partners. Our community partners were part of the entire process from the visit and also seeing our work at midterm. We learned in our community workshops with the participants from 7 to 87 that residents are dedicated to preserving its cultural history through community architecture. Student designers shared their community gifts from their design research teams, as well as early concepts for what Blue Note Junction could be. This is a full-day workshop to meet our stakeholders' visions to create inclusive sites of liberation and equity. At the end of that engagement, we sat with Dwayne and Safi, as you see on the left, in the Peace Garden, making sure we understood and learned what is essential. We learned how our work could be seeded, emerging to flowers, as Dwayne loves to say, with design innovations ranging from spatial organization and phasing, to material selection, to strategies in response to highway encroachment that sustainably re-engage the site and urban fabric. After our final review, Dwayne and Safi were so excited about the work that they plan to integrate a part of all of the 13 student designs into Blue Note Junction. So I'll share 3 projects from the studio, and these are the 3 students who are continuing to work and collaborate as Barnett Spencer Horsley interns this spring. It's Josh Eckert, Ruwei Gong, and Joyce Martin. First, you'll see Josh's work here, and he designed one version of the 13 ideas of what could happen on the plots of land that they have. He used the quilt as a metaphor to understand the layers of the neighborhood, stemming from research in his design research team with Ariana Arenas and Julia Moore. Patches held quotes from the community. They understood the assets and also community wishes. They brought that quilt down to our day with workshop participants, as well as the models Josh created here you see on the left. Participants could move around the program on the site to determine where the program is best where. Josh analyzed the building materials that we found throughout the Peace Garden and also took into account the houses of residents to be torn down and to integrate these into the new construction to remember their legacies. This is already happening in the Peace Garden by Dwayne. The Peace Garden then acts as a template for how to build and reuse. And this is also a part of youth engagement, an essential thread we understood firsthand on the visit, with local youth being present and also would build some of the structures. Josh's use of empathic methods of deep listening during our time created a materials language specifically of this place. At the top, you'll see an artist's village. You can see how that patchwork starts to form individual moments in a collective community. And at the bottom, that patchwork starts to grow over time, created by artists to cover the sound wall. It ends in a design looking from Burton Street, where the meaning of community is in form, all of the buildings in a collective patchwork. Ruwei Gong understood Dwayne and Safi's wish to have a way to generate income from reuse. This is creating a reuse recycling center as her project hub. There's a rainwater collection system above and sorting happening below. It's supported financially in the first phase by an artist village. And as the phases continue, recycled art installations will occur, supporting a farmer's market and wellness facilities. Ruwei understands the need for drawings to show you that all-important view, and you know what this is like if you head to a transfer center, that process of dropping off materials from your car. She stepped us through those views you can see here, also understanding the social impact of transfer centers and the impact of this with the community on the site. And at the end, you can see an image of E.W. Pearson smiling at you, knowing that you're supporting the community once again. You're also smiling because you got a reward card for coming and a scratch card after filling out your reward card. The scratch card gets you $10 off any purchase, and you work with an artist on site or volunteer on the site for an hour. Joyce Martin's research team focused on the rich history of Burton Street. That's Ted Owen, Lydia Cartwright, and also with Joyce. And they understood the importance of art as collective healing as the foundation of Hood Huggers. Joyce researched the Spiral Group, the iconic New York-based art collective were alive from 1965 to 1963, seeking to understand art's role in the civil rights movement. Joyce embodied them, creating the amazing work you see on the far right. Joyce developed the E.W. Pearson Collective Network to design artist villages respectful to local homes, with phasing to meet revenue and community goals. This is centered around a new spiral and an artist community from this place for all. The result is a design to uplift Burton Street's creativity, healing, and history, rooted in Black historical abstract art, and creating the new spiral, a cycle of growth on Burton Street. These three amazing student designers are meeting weekly with Dwayne and Safi, analyzing our studio's work to support the contractors, local architects, and youth designers on site to build Blue Note Junction. Here are some examples of our current work. On the left, where Josh analyzed all 13 works to see common spatial organizations. Joyce and Rouet assessed in the middle the most common materials to help with cost and sustainability plans. And at the end, you can see that we're all preparing a proposal of sound wall designs. This one is by Liv Orlando, to help Dwayne and Safi ensure its development with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. I'll end by sharing our newly released book, Empathic Design, Perspectives on Creating Inclusive Spaces with Island Press. Dr. Bohannon is in the book as well as Liz Ogbu and myself. The book shares empathic design methods from 10 national, international practicing contributors dedicated to the personal and professional ways of working as you've seen today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to the Q&A, and I'll pass it off to Professor and Dr. Bohannon.
Thank you, Elgin. Thank you first to the Office of Lifetime Learning for the opportunity to engage with you today. Hopefully my talk will be a fruitful space for understanding how landscape architects and other designers can explore how empathy, community engagement, and collective actions can address social and environmental inequalities. In my time with you today, we'll share a few guiding principles that shape the community engaged work in the landscape architecture studio that we've been running for the last 2 years with my colleague, Rebecca Hinch, and also we'll contextualize that work through two projects along Florida's Forgotten Coast. But before I get into that, I always think it's important for me to share with you why this work is important to me. And so my approach to examining uneven geographies or landscapes of imposition and the power of stories and narratives and community identities and community identity to address longstanding structural inequalities within society is rooted in my experiences as an African-American landscape architect from Memphis. Having grown up in a city with a legacy of racial divisions that demarcate the streets through redlining and a central auction square where the richness of the soil gave rise to cotton farming and slavery, where the U.S. Civil Rights Movement was born and where MLK gave this, I have been to the mountaintop speech before he was assassinated. Memphis is the literal terrain that inspires my research to question structures and infrastructures of power and the way they shape a sense of place and why the voice of community matters. The concerns of justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion, particularly my role here at UVA, are foundational to my scholarship, as well as to my approach to design education and my outreach more broadly. And as an intellectual terrain, I believe that intentional community engaged design is a transformative method and process that can build community capacity, address social vulnerabilities, and highlight unjust access and representations in design disciplines, as well as in the built environment, which is critically important for eradicating unjust practices, more broadly speaking. And so I want to open with a quote from a colleague of mine, Kofi Boone, fellow landscape architect and professor at NC State. And Kofi asks, what if landscapes were approached as a way to help invisible people and places to be seen? What if landscape processes were developed to help us all live with dignity? And what if, through our continued and shared commitment to building together a more just society, we resisted those forces that will pull us apart, instead engaging in the work with the intent of being connected? And so now I want to take you to the area where we've been, it's been a focus of study for the studio for the last 2 years in landscape architecture. So take a moment and travel to the panhandle of Florida with me and visualize the following scene, or you can see the image of it here. Morning comes gently to Apalachicola. Oyster boats and shrimp boats begin their daily pilgrimages as the sun rises on the Florida coast. The lights twinkle on this fishing village, its residents ready for another day in an unspoiled paradise. If you ever wondered if such places still exist, yes, old Florida lives here. All right. This is an excerpt from Southern Living magazine. But in 2021, the newly revitalized Apalachicola, which is in the panhandle of Florida, city of about 2,500 people, and the county seat of the county seat for Franklin County, features artisanal shops, fancy seafood restaurants, and historic plaques. But the official old Florida narrative omits the history of the African-American population of the city and the broader region. Historical sites contribute to this erasure. A marker outside of a restored cotton warehouse downtown states that Apalachicola was once the largest cotton port in the South. Yet no mention is made of the enslaved population that not only produced the crop during the cotton boom of the 1830s, but also laid the foundation for the African-American communities in the region with that. So I say that to say, stories are important, or they play an important role in the development and survival of culture, right? They also provide a significant information about language, history, and the environment. In all forms, stories and histories are connected in our daily lives and contribute to the makeup of our societies, from entire cities to local communities. Historical practices and marginalization of Black communities in planning and design that shape the very spatial, economic, and environmental conditions have proven challenging to their survival. In many cases, these historical practices have included practices of conflict, inequality, discrimination, and displacement. So at this critical moment of social and ecological change, it is our responsibility as designers and planners and citizens to disrupt, right, these practices through our work, to reflect the values and needs of marginalized communities. We need a shift in how we work with communities and the ways our community projects are conceptualized and actualized. These projects should come from the community themselves in terms of addressing self-identified issues. So for me, the town of Apalachicola, and particularly the Hill community, which is the African-American community within the city of Apalachicola, serves as a critical space to engage with community narratives to disrupt the marginalization in its many forms, right? So Appalach, as they call it, sits at the center of two important cultural landscapes along what is called, the Gulf Coast, but what is also called the Forgotten Coast. First is Money Bayou Beach, which was the African-American beach during segregation. And then second is the Negro Fort at Prospect Bluff, which sits deep in the Apalachicola National Forest and was a beacon of hope and a landscape of liberation to Maroons between 1812 and 1815, and was a part of a much larger Maroon landscape that stretches across the American South and the Caribbean. So how do we do this work, right? So to situate the work, but also provide a kind of a pedagogical lens in the classroom and working with the students and our community partners, we utilize what we call RP3, which is defined as real people, real problems, and real projects, and incorporates a deep learning through methods of community mapping and storytelling that build capacity for effective community engagement and social change. And with that, I use the particular type of engagement that I utilize in the classroom and also in the community is disruptive engagement, which is like, what does that really mean? So, as designers, particularly from this educational standpoint, we should not be in the mode of trying to fix communities. Rather, we should be looking through our work to try to heal best we can. And so through this, at least the way I see this, through the work, through this disruptive pedagogy, getting students to slow down, but also move at the speed of trust in themselves to do the work, but also trusting each other as a cohort, and then also building trust with the community to do the work that matters. And then also learning how to center voices of the community in the work that they're trying to do, and also getting on the values that you want to engage with as a designer, and also being in community with students. So getting them out and in many cases out of the state, which I'll talk about this here momentarily. Another piece of the work that's really important is being grounded in place. It's critical to the work that we're doing in the studio. In this particular project that's been going on for the last 2 years, students were asked to create, a regional atlas of uneven geographies as a means to study and present both like essential information about place and critical understandings of the complex evolution, structure, culture, and natural systems of the landscape, but also as a reflective practice and exercise in mapping those interwoven characteristics of the place and its people. And it allows the students to then start to unpack what it actually means to be living on what is called the Forgotten Coast. And so the question is forgotten by whom? And so we'll share a couple of those mappings with you, just to kind of give you a way to understand how we ended. And we do this before we get on the bus and go to Apalachicola. So it's a way for us to have these conversations with community members virtually, but then discussions on site when we get to place. So Apalachicola, will experience a profound change in its natural landscape in the coming decade. North of town, there's a 100 square mile tract of forest, a forested wetland that will wither over the next 10 years, becoming what is called the ghost forest that will gradually be swallowed by sea level rise. This area will become one of the largest ghost forests in Florida, offering an unmistakable warning of the region's vulnerability to climate change. And then also, recent climatic changes have resulted in the salinization of forest soils, causing tree die-off and saltwater marsh encroachment that appears as a skeleton of the former forest itself. So without, a coastal vegetative barrier, inland communities are more vulnerable to hurricane, storm surges, and flooding at a time when storm intensity is increasing. And in this particular case is Apalachicola and the Hill community. And then you start getting to this other kind of, you can't talk about climate change without talking about race, which also in the South, you can't talk about race without talking about slavery and the slavery and kind of industrial complex, but also its ecological exploitations. So within Apalachicola itself, approximately 1,400 Africans were brought to through Apalachicola and moved to various plantations in the area. As a matter of fact, on the edge of the hill, there's a former plantation still there. The house is still there called the Ormond House. And so these markers in the landscape are still visible to residents. But yeah, so the house, the Thomas Ormond House still stands, along the eastern edge of the hill, which is a steadfast reminder of people's desire and commitment to creating community and building a sense of place together through the brutality of slavery and now the pressures of climate change. And then with that comes this other piece of this notion of where the Black cemeteries are. This is a mapping by Julia McNeely from last semester, and really starting to understand where the Black cemeteries are, but then also where they are in terms of areas of inundation and what the plan needs to be in order to preserve Black cemeteries. And that's some ongoing work that she will be doing moving forward. But in all, to do the work, we are at this critical moment in history and in the academy in terms of the work that we do. And we have to turn away from working on communities, but move towards working with. And so here is part of the community team that we have been working with the last 2 years. Well, I've been at UVA and a couple of years before that at my previous institution. And this is the team that's generate an intentional partnership through Florida A&M University, local educators, artists, and community organizers, and then also bringing in the role of the School of Architecture and UVA into the project. And so with this, our role is not to come in and take over. Rather, we've been able to center the voices of the community at every stage of the project during the semester, and also the work that goes on in the community engagement lab outside of the semester with students. Here's the students on the last day of the trip that we took in October of 2023. Amazing group of students. This is one of the studios that we're able to go. One of the other pieces that I think is really important about this is, I talked about getting out of the studio and out of the building. We hopped on the bus and I rode with the students on the bus 15 hours each way from Charlottesville down to St. George Island, where we were hosted by the community. And it's important for the students to also build community in that process. And I also think it's kind of a rite of passage for a community engaged studio for students to really get to know each other in terms of their cohort. And then some of the practices that happened when we were there, we had a lot of listening circles, a lot of storytelling from elders, and that was a gift that they gave us in terms of being able to understand how important and significant these landscapes were to them in their childhood, but also thinking about a future scenarios for those. So we had a lot of community listening sessions in Apalachicola, but also a sistering town of Port St. Joe as well. We also found it important to break bread with community members as well. So they actually hosted us for a couple of lunches, and we had a chance to, again, have a gift meet with the elders to really learn about their experiences. And then there were student birthdays. Again, building community within the cohort is an important piece. So I want to bring you to Money Bayou Beach for a couple of moments. And this was the site that was the African-American beach, basically. This is a picture from Money Bayou. Not much there is left from the old times, but founded by 5 African-American members of the North Port St. Joe and Apalachicola community. And it was at its heyday the place that people would African-Americans would come and enjoy the beach from all over the state of Florida. Not much is left of Money Bayou Beach. You can see there's a couple of homes. The scale of the homes are at the time in its heyday, the beach homes were about 800 square foot. Some of these are well over 3,000 square foot, and the land ownership has shifted. And it's really just kind of a relic of itself. And so the community was really interested in trying to understand how they could mark the landscape and trying to reclaim some of that. Some more images of Money Bayou itself, pretty idyllic coastal beach there. And this scheme by Sammy Hubbard really looked at how could you actually utilize the oral histories and the memories to curate a homecoming in a way, to actually take over some of the vacant parcels that were there as a way to reclaim and mark space through building and landscape. So it's a kind of an interesting scheme in terms of like a community homecoming that can be crafted over time. Another scheme was we worked with some youth. One of our community partners does dance with a youth group there. And so Paige was looking at how choreography can be used as a way to give an impetus towards development, but also provide a space for youth to not only engage with the beach and the local ecology, but also through movement and art. And so putting those two kind of concepts together to create a space to reclaim also Money Bayou. And then Lizette worked on a scheme of going from sand to water and actually providing utilizing one of the vacant parcels to actually reach back to the water, reinvigorating that connection between land and water. And as one of actually a couple of the community partners talked about being such an important piece that was taken away. And so understanding, how can you create an open space where everyone can be able to attend, but also have some intentionality of actually about getting out into the Gulf itself. And then this last piece by Samin looked at, what happens if we end up having a actual kind of a monument or a museum, a memorial to the history of African Americans, not only in the region, but also in terms of like looking at music and leisure spaces, and also centering Money Bayou in that. And so here's some images of what that space could be. And so that was an interesting set of proposals there. And then I'll quickly move on to Prospect Bluff, which is the site of the maroon landscape. You can see from this image, this is in the Gulf, right along the Apalachicola River. It's a larger piece of the overall Florida landscape there in terms of where it kind of sits. And then this is actually, so part of the erasure of this site, you can see in the image on the left, the larger part of the fort. There's Fort Gaston, which is the American fort, which is the name that is often used. In the center of that piece there, the larger piece is the British fort. The center of that is the Negro fort that was actually exploded, and a couple hundred formerly enslaved people perished, men, women, and children in that landscape. And so you can kind of see in this image how that works. It's kind of currently run by the Park Service. And so we had a community session on grounds with a couple of the descendants. We have an event in May where we're going to show some of this work back on site, but also we'll be meeting with a few more descendants from Trinidad, Jamaica, and another one of the islands in the upper Antilles there that will hopefully spark more work that comes at, how can descendants then now start to mark this landscape of their ancestors. So the work that the students did this past semester kind of gave an impetus to that. You can see the idyllic landscape. This is the image of Fort Gaston, the American fort that's there in the Apalachicola River. And then this is the citadel that exploded at the center of that one image that I showed you. This is a kind of a little marker that's out there. You can see the scale of what that building might have looked like. And then so the schemes for this, Ari looked at really taking that citadel and that particular component of the landscape and trying to understand how then could you put a kind of a bloom calendar to that where certain plants will bloom at different times of the year to accentuate color and texture, and we would of course listen to community members in terms of what that would look like, but then also within this landscape being in the longleaf pond kind of a forest there, how do you then bring the visual actually bring the visual down to a human scale? And so he was developed a series of walkways, but also fabrics that can be dyed. I think he was thinking about using dye from goldenrod, which is pretty prevalent in this particular landscape as a natural dye to dye the flags, to kind of bring not only visual character, but also to capture the wind, the pretty, and then also looking at bringing in some of the quilts and things like that often tell stories within themselves. And then Joyce really looked at some of the kind of overarching, looking at the life of maroons overall in terms of nourishment, resistance, exploration, arrival, and how could you then create a landscape through some ecological plantings that will highlight the maroons' ability to work with the landscape that was there and live off the land in harmony. So resetting that relationship. And then Charlotte looked also as looking at ritual through gathering, grief, discovery, and remembrance, reflection, and connection. So bringing that notion of ritual, because there is this is a burial site as well. So providing opportunities for how ritualistic practices actually happen on site and through this kind of ever-changing landscape. And then also, so Schwei looked at also the relationship between Longleaf Pond and the reciprocity of burning, and then also looking at mourning and participation and the relationship between the longleaf pond and also the black body in terms of the extraction and extortion that have come out of both of those in this area with formerly, with enslaved people, but also through the turpentine and forest industry that was pretty prevalent in North Florida, particularly in this region. And so through that, central to this work is sustained engagement. We have done this project multiple times. As Elgin talked about, it's important for our community partners to show up. We meet in on the community's turf day, and they host us, and then we feel it's important for them also to be on grounds with us as we're presenting the work, and they're part of the juries. And so how do we, being able to sustain that in multiple ways? And then as I close, I wanted to kind of share with you ways that engagement can really be disruptive. And there's a couple ways just in this diagram that I think about it. One is reframing power dynamics, shifting dynamics by involving residents as active co-creators of projects and recognizing their expertise and their lived experiences. I think centering community wisdom is really important, and by utilizing creative methods to amplify community narrative stories of resilience, struggle, and triumph, past, present, and future stories. Also, cultural competence and contextual understanding. This type of work encourages, in this case, designers, right, to learn about the cultural histories, traditions, and local knowledge. I think that's critical for our students to learn those skills now before they get out into the world, if we want our professions to actually have some positive impact through the challenges that we're facing. Place-based design, working with communities on design proposals that center around context-specific solutions that come from the community. And then advocacy and activism, empowering community members to advocate for change and also challenge oppressive norms. This also works for the students in terms of the education that we provide and making sure that we're educating them to solve problems that we're not even sure what they're going to be yet, but we do know there will be problems. So how can they be adaptive and advocate for what they need in those in terms of that? And then also long-term relationships, no one-off projects. Building trust through prolonged engagement is critical for this work to be disruptive. With that, I say thank you. Pass it back to Susan.
So great. Thank you so much to our speakers. And we have a few minutes to take some questions. So I'm going to ask the first question. First person said, she's so thankful for the presentation. She works in a nonprofit across the Northeast, mostly in the environmental and water spaces. And she's asking, perhaps you could touch on strategies for better engagement in cities versus rural spaces. So do you see, might have some advice, or do you see there being a difference in how you engage in cities or in more urban or rural spaces?
I'll take for me, if there's issues that are happening with the community, whether there's urban or rural, it's being attentive to those needs. I don't think there's necessarily a difference with that, as long as you are involving the community members in a way where they're working with you. So were they able to not only be at the table, but have a voice that's not given to them. We can't give people voice, but they should be able to have space for that voice to be heard, regardless if it's urban or rural. Just being able to kind of establish and build the trust, and then also being able to co-create the understanding of what the issues are, and then how do you then move out of those and towards solutions.
I also wanted to recommend some great ideas that came from Liz Ogbu, who was the co-teacher of our studio. In the chapter in the book, she actually talks about this specifically in her work at Hunters Point in San Francisco, where she set up moments for community engagement. And we were very familiar with the idea of community engagement being an evening or post-work thing. Perhaps the idea is it gets moved to the weekend. And she created almost a circus-like space where you could bring your kids, at the same time record stories that connected with what could happen on a possible site that was connected to PG and E in San Francisco. So all of a sudden now you have the opportunity to overcome issues of being time poor, but now to have a moment to really connect with community and really be respectful of everyone's time and ability to attend.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have somebody, a live question here. So she says she's curious about how you sustain engagement in these long-term relationships with your community partners beyond the studio or perhaps across studios in subsequent years. And is this something that aligns to your research, or are there other resources that enable you to do this work and sustain partnerships?
Grants help.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I try to nest the work. I'm a community engaged scholar, so I write about working with communities, but also like the educational benefits for students in that space. So I try to nest things together. But for us to go to Florida for the studio trip was funded by a Mellon grant in a partnership with the North Florida African American Corridor, which is a nonprofit group in Apalachicola and Florida A&M University. So being able to do that, but then also resources that we have, there's like ways for us to have resources within the School of Architecture, but also on grounds with CTE and looking at course development stuff, and then can help you maybe go after Jefferson. There's ways to kind of nest things together. But yes, I've been fortunate enough to have funding that helps with that, and then also um, it's interesting how it works with when students are in a class and or do the work. I think Elgin talked about this as well. They want to do the work outside of that. So it's really like, finding the money to hire the students so they can continue the work is one of the things that I find rewarding, and being able to do that is something that I would like to continue to provide, because I think it allows the students to really develop their skills. And it's like, that's what we need, because when you leave grounds, we want you to be able to do this work in a very intentional way. So.
I agree with Dr. Bohannon, and also the fact that it creates a space for creativity with you and your partners. One of the things that's going and continuing now with Blue Note Junction is that we simply are thinking about ways to make it work. So it becomes a space in between those grants to assess and to think, and also be more creative about what's possible.
This leads into this question. How do community organizations, leaders, artists find the grants? Sort of via the federal, state, city, and governments in order to pay community members to do engagement work, as well as preserving the stories of the community's legacy residents.
I could start with that one. A lot of the community work I've been part of is either connected with groups such as the African American Cultural Action Fund, which is a great space to look at. They have 4 different set grants that range from programming to preparation to also exhibits and interpretation. Looking at an NEA, Our Town grant is another great grant that always speaks to and makes sure to fund and community partners. Local community foundations are another great place to start with. Offices of equity and diversity are also another. But there also becomes a moment too to think, and here we have the UVA Equity Center, which is a great resource to connect with, to see possibilities, and to find out if there's a local equity center in your location to connect with. Another thing to think about too, I think with that, is to think about local impact grants, if those do exist, and also mini grants could also help with community engagement processes.
Yeah, I was gonna I'll echo that with Elgin. I think the local grants are really important in the mini grants, because you can, have utilize those to get, work a little bit of proof of concept that can help you then go after some larger grants. And that's been successful with many of the community partners that I've worked with, starting local and then kind of branching out.
Okay, this question is asking about your engagement techniques, methods, and perhaps nuances that you have both learned from each other and in your respective studios throughout the studio projects and the student work developing. So, we have folks here that are doing the similar work, and so they're just any tips for techniques or methods and nuances that you do for your engagement.
Well, one of the things I think is important if you're doing this type of work, particularly within in the studio setting. Elgin, we've talked about this is sitting down and setting a group of norms for the students in terms of expectations and ways that, and so you create a space for them to also ask questions and be prepared. We run like a little mini method section, about talking to people and eye contact and drawing upside down, and these kind of, they seem like small kind of techniques, but they're really important in that space when you're meeting with community partners. And really one of the most important things is not being afraid to sit down and break bread with someone. I mean, that's one of the things that I think our studio found that out. Like people, yeah, I would love to talk with you, but let's grab a coffee or let's have a meal. And then that opened up like a one little step of trust that within that space. Then also like the power of dialogue is something that I talk about within my studio a lot. It's just like, it's really important. If you want to know something, ask the question, but it's the way in which you ask it where it's not necessarily extractive is the key. And so being able to build a conversation to get around the issues that are at hand is a skill that I try to provide the students in the studio. So.
I agree with the ideas that CL is sharing, but I also wanted to share just one story about the images you saw about our community day in October. You saw where students were sitting at tables and sharing their work. To prepare for that, we actually did scenarios where students actually played different roles of different community members. And so it became a real great moment to really start to think about how to engage and have those conversations when you're down on the site. Part of it really is to understand that we're all human and connected. So it's all about setting that table in a way that feels comfortable. And we all know what it's like to have a neighborhood conversation and connect with each other. So practicing that was essential. And it was exciting to see how students followed through on site.
I wrote down a quote from CL that said, "Move at the speed of trust." And I really like that. And I might use that in many ways. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. We have an alum that's asking, is there a way for alums to get involved in these types of projects?
Sure. We would love to have alumni involvement. One of the things we have, the Equity Center, we're formulating this community engagement lab, we have studios. There's plenty of ways. It'd be nice to I don't know, just reach out to Elgin and I and propose some ideas, because this is the work as a pillar to what we want to do as a school, and it's important for us, and to have our alumni wanting to be involved. I think we just have to find a way to make that work, and our students love to interface and interact with our alums, and it's particularly if we have alums in the areas in which we're working, and we will love to be able to include you in those processes.
Great. So like they said, please, you can look up on the School of Architecture website and find their email and speak to them, email them both directly. Well, I think our time is up, but I really want to thank both of our speakers. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. And it's inspiring to hear about the community development and design work that you are doing in these communities. So thank you so much. I want to thank Dean Hutson for kicking off the program, and also to Kim Wong-Haggart for her partnership in today's program. So thank you so much to all of you for your participation today. And we also want to thank our participants for joining us today. To find future lifetime learning programs and to find our programming, you just visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. When you get to our website, you can check out future lifetime learning programs, the vodcast library, our Thoughts from the Lawn programs, the vodcast library, and our UVA Speaks podcast series to read, watch, and listen to UVA expert faculty. So thank you again for joining us for this hour of learning, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.